If the woman in Lab 7 stops breathing, this entire station dies with her. The message repeated through the shuttle speakers as Ethan Cole stared out the frost-covered cockpit window at Black Site Epsilon, drifting above the dead moon like a rusting coffin. Half the station lights were dark. The rest blinked weakly against the endless black. Even from 300 yards away, the place looked abandoned. Ethan tightened the straps on his gray quarantine jacket and exhaled slowly through his nose. 6 months ago, Black Site Epsilon had housed over 400 scientists, military officers, and xenobiologists. Now the official report listed only 17 life signs remaining. The shuttle docked with a metallic thud that echoed through the hull. Then came silence. No greeting crew. No security detail. Just the distant groan of old machinery somewhere deep inside the station walls. Ethan stepped into the airlock as freezing recycled air brushed across his face. The smell hit him immediately. Antiseptic chemicals. Burned wiring. Stale oxygen. The scent of a place that had forgotten sunlight. Red emergency lights painted the corridor in pulses as his boots moved across the steel floor. Every few feet, quarantine warnings flashed across cracked monitor screens. Biohazard level Omega. Contact restrictions active. Do not approach patient 0. Ethan kept walking. Somewhere above him, pipes rattled softly like the station itself was shivering. Lieutenant Ethan Cole, the station AI said through hidden speakers, its female voice distorted by static. Confirming arrival authorization. Confirmed. You are advised to maintain a minimum distance of 8 feet from infected personnel. Ethan glanced toward a smear of dark handprints along the corridor wall. How many infected personnel are left? The AI hesitated for 2 full seconds. 1. The lights flickered harder this time. Ethan stopped in front of a sealed blast door marked Lab 7. Frost covered the edges of the metal frame. He could hear something faint on the other side. Not screaming. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. Human almost. The AI spoke again. Warning. Patient 0 has survived longer than projected models. Allow. Ethan frowned. How long? 212 days. That made him pause. No species survived the Vare plague for more than 11 days. The disease attacked the nervous system first. Fever. Hallucinations. Organ collapse. Entire colonies had vanished before containment fleets even arrived. Ethan rested his hand against the cold control panel beside the door. Open it. Lieutenant Cole, the AI replied quietly. Every previous medical officer requested transfer within 48 hours. I'm not asking for their records. Another pause. Then the blast door unlocked with a hydraulic hiss. Cold vapor spilled across the floor. Ethan stepped inside. The room beyond was dim except for pale blue medical screens glowing against the walls. Tubes and diagnostic cables hung from the ceiling like lifeless vines. At the center of the chamber sat a woman behind reinforced quarantine glass. She was taller than any human, nearly 7 feet, even while seated. Her skin carried a faint blue-violet glow beneath the low lights, and silver-white hair spilled over one shoulder in tangled waves. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Gold. Bright even in the dark. Watching him without blinking. One of her hands trembled slightly against the armrest beside her. Black vein-like patterns traced beneath her skin toward her throat before fading again. Sick. Exhausted. Still terrifyingly beautiful. Ethan realized then that she wasn't looking at him with fear. She was looking at him with pity. Her voice came through the glass softly, rough from disuse. Another human. She lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. You should leave before I start dying again. The quarantine glass hummed softly between them as Ethan stepped closer to the medical console beside the chamber door. Thin blue lines moved across the monitor screen, tracking her pulse, neural activity, oxygen levels, and dozens of biological markers he did not recognize. Almost every warning icon was flashing red. But the strangest part was the stability graph. According to the records, her condition had improved by 3% since he entered the room. Ethan frowned at the display. That does not make sense. The woman gave a weak smile without humor. Nothing about me makes sense anymore. Her voice sounded tired now. Not physically tired. The kind that settled into someone after too many nights alone with their own thoughts. Ethan removed his gloves slowly and placed them on the steel counter beside him. The station lights flickered again overhead, throwing pale shadows across the room. I am Lieutenant Ethan Cole, he said calmly. Medical Containment Division. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on him. You are the seventh one. Seventh what? Seventh human they have sent here. The words landed heavier than he expected. Ethan glanced toward the dark corridor outside the chamber. What happened to the others? For the first time, her expression shifted. Guilt. Sharp and immediate. The plague happened. Silence filled the room after that. Somewhere deeper in the station, metal groaned softly like the structure itself was under pressure. Ethan tapped through the medical logs on the screen. Most of the files were corrupted. Entire sections missing. Crew transfers. Emergency lockdowns. Distress calls sent to command fleets. Then came the casualty reports. Day 14. 27 infected. Day 28. 112 infected. Day 40. Containment failure. Ethan stopped scrolling. Every log after that contained the same sentence at the bottom. Do not approach patient 0. What is your name? He asked quietly. The woman looked surprised by the question, as if nobody had asked her that in a very long time. Lysara. She swallowed once before continuing. Lysara Vane. Ethan nodded slightly. How long since someone entered this room? Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling lights. 58 days. I counted for a while. The answer hit harder than he expected. 58 days alone inside a freezing medical chamber while an entire galaxy feared breathing the same air as her. Ethan pulled a nearby chair across the floor with a metallic scrape and sat down directly in front of the quarantine glass. Lysara stiffened immediately. What are you doing? Talking. That is not safe. Neither is flying 12 billion miles to a dying plague. Station. A faint sound escaped her then. Not quite laughter. More like remembering what laughter used to feel like. Ethan studied her carefully now that he was closer. The black patterns beneath her skin pulsed slowly with her heartbeat, fading and returning like cracks of dark lightning underwater. Her silver hair drifted slightly in the filtered airflow around her shoulders. She looked less like a monster and more like someone carrying something too heavy for one body to survive. Then the station AI interrupted them. Warning, the voice announced sharply. Pathogen activity increasing. Ethan immediately looked toward the monitors. Every biological reading on the screen had started climbing. Neural activity, heart rate, cellular instability. Lysara lowered her head as her breathing became uneven. No, she whispered. Not again. Frost spread rapidly across the inside edges of the quarantine glass. Warning alarms erupted overhead in violent red flashes. Ethan stood instantly. Lysara, look at me. She pressed one trembling hand against her chest as dark patterns spread higher along her neck. You need to leave, she said through shallow breaths. Right now. But Ethan did not move. Because buried beneath the alarms and flashing warnings, he noticed something impossible happening on the monitor beside him. The closer he stood to the glass, the slower her condition deteriorated. The alarms continued screaming through Lab 7 as Ethan stared at the monitor beside the quarantine chamber. Lysara's neural instability had dropped 12% in less than 30 seconds. That was impossible. The Vare plague did not slow down once an episode started. Every medical paper Ethan had studied during transit repeated the same conclusion. Progressive deterioration. Irreversible collapse. Fatality rate 100%. Yet the numbers on the screen were moving backward. Ethan stepped even closer to the glass. The black patterns beneath Lysara's skin immediately stopped spreading. Her breathing steadied little by little as the flashing red warnings across the monitor faded into orange. Inside the chamber, she looked up at him slowly, confusion overtaking the fear in her eyes. What are you doing? She whispered. Ethan barely heard her. His attention stayed locked on the data feed racing across the display. Hormonal response stabilization. Neural pressure decreasing. Pathogen suppression detected. His pulse quickened. AI, he said sharply. Run comparative analysis between my biosignature and the chamber readings. The station voice answered instantly. Processing. Lysara pressed one hand against the side of the medical chair as another wave of exhaustion passed through her. Even weakened, she carried herself with a strange kind of dignity, like someone trying not to break in front of a stranger. Ethan had seen that look before. Soldiers carried it sometimes after long deployments. The expression people wore when they were too tired to keep pretending they were okay. Lieutenant, the AI said after several seconds. Results indicate an anomalous biological interaction between human subject Ethan Cole and pathogen host Lysara Vane. Ethan frowned. Define anomalous. Silence. Then the answer came quieter this time. Human proximity appears to suppress active plague response. The room went still. Even the alarms seemed distant now beneath the weight of those words. Lasara stared at him through the glass as if she had forgotten how to breathe. No, she said softly. That cannot be real. Ethan looked back toward her. You said the episodes usually get worse? She nodded slowly. Every time. How often? Lately, she hesitated. Every few hours. Ethan glanced again at the monitor. Her readings were still improving. For the first time since entering the station, no warning symbols were flashing red. Outside the chamber windows, endless stars drifted silently over the dead moon below. Cold white light spilled through the frost-covered glass and across Lasara's face. She looked less frightening now, less like the galaxy's most dangerous patient and more like a woman who had not slept peacefully in months. Ethan pulled the chair closer and sat again directly in front of the quarantine barrier. Tell me what happened here. Lasara lowered her eyes. For a moment, Ethan thought she would refuse. Then she spoke. Quietly. We thought we found a cure. Her fingers tightened against the armrest. The Vare plague was spreading across outer colonies faster than containment fleets could respond. Entire cities were vanishing in weeks. So Black Site Epsilon began testing adaptive biological counteragents. Ethan understood immediately. Experimental pathogen research. Dangerous even before everything went wrong. And you volunteered, he guessed. A faint bitter smile crossed her lips. I designed it. Ethan felt cold settle deeper into his chest. You are a scientist? I was. The station lights dimmed briefly as emergency generators shifted power somewhere below them. Lasara looked toward the ceiling like she was listening to ghosts inside the walls. At first, the treatment worked, she continued softly. The plague weakened inside me. Then it changed. Ethan watched the black lines beneath her skin pulse once with her heartbeat. Adaptive mutation, he murmured. She nodded. It bonded to my nervous system. Fed on stress, fear, isolation. Her golden eyes slowly returned to him. Every person who came near me became afraid eventually. Ethan remembered the empty corridors outside, the abandoned stations, the transfer logs that stopped halfway through sentences. 58 days alone. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms against his knees. I am still here. Lasara looked at him for a long moment after that. Then, for the first time since he arrived, the trembling in her hands stopped completely. The station entered artificial night cycle 3 hours later. Most of the overhead lights dimmed automatically, leaving only thin strips of pale white illumination running along the corridors outside Lab 7. Ethan sat alone in the medical control room reviewing corrupted research files while cold coffee steamed beside his datapad. The deeper he searched into Black Site Epsilon's records, the stranger everything became. Entire experiment logs had been manually erased. Security footage vanished after day 39. Personal messages ended mid-sentence. One transmission caught his attention immediately. A frightened voice filled the speakers through layers of static. Patient 0 is not causing the mutation. She is containing it. Then the file abruptly cut to silence. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. Across the glass chamber, Lasara sat curled beneath a thermal blanket near the observation window. The blue light from the dead moon outside reflected softly across her silver hair. She looked smaller tonight somehow. Less like the terrifying figure from the quarantine reports, and more like someone exhausted from carrying everyone else's fear. The monitor beside Ethan chimed quietly. Lasara's condition remained stable. More stable than at any point in the last 200 days. Ethan rubbed one hand across his jaw, staring at the impossible readings. Then the station suddenly shuddered beneath him. The lights flickered hard. Somewhere below the laboratory deck, metal groaned with a deep, grinding sound. Power fluctuation detected, the AI announced. Backup oxygen systems temporarily offline. Ethan stood instantly. For how long? Estimated restoration time, for minutes. The answer came too calmly for his liking. Frost immediately began spreading across the lower sections of the quarantine glass as temperatures dropped throughout the wing. Inside the chamber, Lasara pushed herself upright too quickly and winced. Her breathing became uneven again. Ethan checked the oxygen monitors. Levels inside her containment room were dropping fast. That should not be happening, he muttered. The chamber has independent reserves. It did, the AI replied. The reserves failed 3 weeks ago. Ethan froze. And nobody thought to mention that. There was nobody left to inform. He swore quietly under his breath and moved toward the emergency panel near the quarantine door. Lasara immediately realized what he was doing. No, her voice sharpened for the first time. Do not open that door. Ethan ignored her and scanned the pressure readings. Oxygen inside the chamber had already fallen below safe levels for her species. You cannot survive another respiratory episode, he said flatly. And you cannot survive exposure to me. Maybe. He entered his security authorization anyway. The panel flashed yellow. Emergency access. Approved. The quarantine seals disengaged with a heavy metallic clunk. Cold air rushed outward as the chamber door slid open 6 inches. Lasara stepped back immediately, fear flashing across her face stronger than any sickness Ethan had seen yet. Ethan. It was the first time she had spoken his name. Quiet. Almost pleading. But Ethan was already inside the chamber securing an auxiliary oxygen line to the wall regulator. The air felt colder in here. Sharper somehow. Like breathing inside an ice storm. He could hear Lasara's uneven breaths only a few feet behind him. Every instinct from his medical training screamed that this was reckless. Dangerous. Stupid. Yet nothing happened. No sudden fever. No dizziness. No biological collapse. The black patterns beneath Lasara's skin actually began fading again the moment he entered the room. Ethan slowly turned toward her. Up close, the difference in their height became obvious. Even weakened, she stood nearly a foot taller than him. Her golden eyes locked onto his with stunned disbelief. Why are you not afraid? She whispered. Ethan secured the oxygen valve before answering. I think you have had enough people looking at you like a disaster. The station lights stabilized overhead with a soft electrical hum. Warm air slowly returned to the chamber. Neither of them moved for several seconds after that. Outside the observation window, stars drifted silently across the darkness. Then Lasara looked down at his bare hand resting only inches from hers. Her voice became very small. You are the first person to enter this room willingly. The station grew quieter over the next several hours. Not peaceful, just exhausted. Blacksite Epsilon sounded like an old ship drifting too long without a crew. Pipes hissed behind frozen walls. Ventilation fans groaned unevenly overhead. Every few minutes, distant metals settled somewhere deep in the lower decks with a hollow echo that rolled through the corridors like thunder underwater. Ethan remained inside the quarantine chamber long after the oxygen system stabilized. At first, it was practical. He wanted to monitor Lasara's response at close range. But after a while, he realized. Neither of them wanted him to leave. Lasara sat near the observation glass wrapped in the gray thermal blanket, while Ethan worked beside the medical console reviewing scans. The strange black patterns beneath her skin had faded to faint shadows now. Her pulse remained steady. No violent spikes. No respiratory collapse. The station AI continued running comparison tests every 15 minutes, as if it still could not believe the results itself. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. You know, he muttered. This is the first assignment I have ever had where the medical computer sounds emotionally confused. Across the room, Lasara looked up from the warm nutrient packet in her hands. Perhaps it inherited that from humans. Ethan glanced at her with a faint smile. That almost sounded like a joke. It was a very small one. Her voice still carried exhaustion, but there was something softer underneath now. Something cautiously alive. Ethan opened another station log on the screen beside him. You designed the original treatment yourself? Lasara nodded slowly. The plague adapted faster than projected models predicted. Traditional counteragents only slowed progression for a few days. She stared down at the silver packet between her hands. I believed a living neural host could contain it permanently. Ethan studied her profile in the dim light. So you used yourself. Nobody else volunteered. The answer came quietly, matter of fact, as if sacrificing herself had once seemed completely reasonable. Ethan looked away toward the observation window before responding. Outside, the dead moon below reflected pale white light across the station hall. Beautiful in the lonely kind of way only space could manage. That was brave, he said finally. Lasara gave a small shake of her head. No, brave would have been stopping before everyone here paid for my mistake. Silence settled gently between them after that. Not awkward. just heavy with things neither of them fully knew how to say yet. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly again around the nutrient packet. "You need real food," he said. "Those medical supplements are terrible." A faint line appeared between her brows. "You can tell by the smell? I survived military field rations for 6 years. Trust me." He stood and crossed toward the chamber storage unit near the wall. After several minutes of searching through old emergency supplies, he finally pulled out a sealed heating tray. "Chicken soup," he announced. "Approximately 12 years expired, but the package is still intact." Lasara stared at him like he had completely lost his mind. Human males are deeply concerning creatures. Ethan laughed quietly under his breath as he activated the heating strip. Warm air slowly filled the chamber, carrying the scent of broth and old spices. The smell felt strangely human inside a room built for isolation and fear. Lasara watched him carefully the entire time. Not suspicious anymore. Curious. Ethan handed her the steaming container a few minutes later. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange. Both of them froze. The station AI immediately chimed overhead. Pathogen activity reduced by an additional 7%. Ethan blinked once. Lasara looked down at her own hand in stunned silence. There was no pain this time. No surge of black beneath her skin. Only warmth. Real warmth. She slowly tightened her fingers around the container while steam drifted upward between them. "Ethan," she said quietly, almost afraid to believe the words herself. "I think the plague is reacting to loneliness." The words stayed in the air long after Lasara spoke them. Ethan stared at her across the dim quarantine chamber while the station ventilation hummed softly overhead. "The plague reacts to loneliness," he repeated quietly. Hearing it out loud made the entire station feel different somehow. The empty corridors, the abandoned medical wings, the transfer requests. Fear had not only isolated Lasara, it had been feeding the thing inside her. Ethan slowly looked back toward the monitor beside him. Every graph confirmed the same impossible pattern. Stress elevated pathogen activity. Isolation accelerated mutation. Direct emotional stabilization reduced symptoms dramatically. Human proximity produced the strongest suppression effect ever recorded. The AI voice interrupted his thoughts. "Correlation probability has exceeded 96%. Ethan leaned back in the chair with a tired exhale. "So the deadliest plague in the galaxy can apparently be treated with basic companionship. Your species continues to be medically irritating," the AI replied. Across the room, Lasara lowered her eyes toward the warm container in her hands. Steam still drifted upward between her fingers. Ethan noticed she had barely touched the food. "You should eat," he said gently. "Your body still needs strength." She nodded once, but did not move immediately. I had forgotten what warm food smelled like. The confession landed quietly between them. Ethan suddenly imagined this room during the last 58 days. Cold nutrient packs, artificial lights, silence broken only by alarms and machinery. No voices, no touch, no one willing to stay. He looked down at the old blanket around her shoulders and felt something twist painfully inside his chest. "That should not happen to anyone," he muttered. Lasara gave a faint smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The galaxy disagreed. Ethan stood and crossed toward the observation window beside her. Outside, the dead moon glowed pale silver beneath drifting clouds of frozen dust. Tiny stars reflected across the glass like scattered ice crystals. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lasara finally took a careful sip from the soup container. Her expression shifted immediately, confused at first, then softer. "This is terrible," she said quietly. Ethan laughed under his breath. "That means it tastes authentic." Another small smile appeared on her face. Real this time. The black shadows beneath her skin faded slightly more. Ethan noticed immediately. So did she. Her fingers tightened around the warm container as something dangerous entered her expression. "Hope. Do not do that," she whispered suddenly. Ethan turned toward her. "Do what?" "Do not make me believe this can end differently." The words came sharper now. Frightened, she stood slowly and moved away from the observation glass. "You do not understand what this station became." Ethan watched her cross the chamber beneath the pale lights. Even weakened, there was grace in the way she moved. Controlled, careful, like someone used to hiding pain behind composure. "Then explain it to me," he said quietly. Lasara stopped near the medical bed with her back partially turned toward him. The first scientists stayed because they believed they could save me, she said. The next group stayed because they thought they could study me. After that, her voice faltered briefly. The rest only stayed because they were trapped. Ethan remained silent. Every person who tried to help eventually became afraid. She continued softly. Not of dying. Of me. The station lights dimmed briefly around them before stabilizing again. Lasara slowly looked back over her shoulder. Her golden eyes reflected against the dark chamber glass. Fear changes people, Ethan. Isolation changes them faster. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Maybe. But so does kindness. She stared at him for several long seconds after that. Then the station AI suddenly interrupted again. Incoming transmission detected from Galactic Containment Command. Ethan frowned immediately. No fleet was scheduled to arrive for another 48 hours. Patch it through. Static filled the chamber speakers before a cold military voice emerged. Blackside Epsilon. This is Containment Fleet Aurelius. Due to Omega-level outbreak conditions, sterilization protocol has been approved. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Define sterilization. Silence answered him for one terrible second. Then the voice replied calmly. This station will be destroyed at 0800 hours. For several seconds after the transmission ended, nobody spoke. The station ventilation hummed softly through the silence while pale warning lights rotated across the chamber walls. Ethan stared at the dead communication panel like he had misheard the message. Sterilization protocol. 8 hours. Blackside Epsilon was no longer considered a medical emergency. It was considered a target. Across the room, Lasara lowered her eyes slowly. There was no surprise on her face. Only resignation. I told you, she said quietly. Hope is dangerous. Ethan looked at her sharply. No, this is politics. He moved toward the communication console and reactivated the channel. Containment Fleet Aurelius. This is Lieutenant Ethan Cole requesting immediate review of sterilization order. Static answered him first. Then the same cold voice returned. Review denied. Ethan clenched his jaw. Patient 0 is stable. Negative. Official records indicate irreversible pathogen integration. Your records are outdated. He glanced toward the monitor beside him. I have measurable suppression data. Human proximity is reducing plague activity dramatically. Silence. Then a second voice entered the transmission. Older. Colder. Lieutenant Cole, the officer said calmly. Blacksite Epsilon has already cost over 400 lives and 6 containment fleets. We will not risk another outbreak because one human medic became emotionally compromised. Ethan felt anger rise hot in his chest. Emotionally compromised? He laughed once in disbelief. You are about to destroy the only living patient who has survived this disease long enough to study a cure. Correction, the officer replied. We are about to prevent another galactic extinction event. The channel terminated instantly. Ethan stood motionless for a long moment beneath the flickering lights. Then he slammed one hand against the metal console hard enough to rattle the screen. The sound echoed sharply through the chamber. Behind him, Lasara remained very still. You should leave before the fleet arrives, she said softly. Ethan turned toward her immediately. Not happening. Ethan. No, he crossed the room toward her with tired frustration written across his face. I am getting very tired of everyone on this station deciding your life is already over. Lasara looked away from him toward the observation glass. The stars outside drifted silently over the curve of the dead moon below. You do not understand what they fear, she whispered. Then explain it to me. Her breathing slowed unevenly before she finally answered. The plague inside me adapts constantly. If containment fails completely, she hesitated, it will spread through planetary populations in weeks. Ethan folded his arms tightly. And yet your symptoms keep decreasing around me. That does not mean the danger is gone. No, he said quietly. It means there is still time. The station lights dimmed briefly again as another power fluctuation rolled through the deck. Somewhere below them, warning sirens activated in distant corridors. The AI voice spoke overhead. Containment Fleet Aurelius has entered orbital range. Ethan walked toward the observation window beside Lasara. Tiny lights now glimmered against the darkness outside. Ships. Large ones. Military grade. Their formation spread slowly around the station like predators surrounding wounded prey. Lasara stepped beside him silently. Even now, Her presence carried strange calm beneath the fear. Ethan noticed the black patterns beneath her skin had almost completely faded. "You know what bothers me most?" he asked quietly. She looked toward him. "What?" Ethan kept his eyes on the fleet outside. "Nobody up there asked your side of the story." Lasara stared at him for a long moment after that. Then she gave a faint, sad smile. "That stopped happening a long time ago." Another transmission alert suddenly flashed across the main console. Ethan activated it immediately. This time the image of an elderly alien scientist appeared through heavy static. Her face looked exhausted. Frightened. "Lieutenant Cole," she said urgently, "if Lasara is stabilizing near you, then the old theories were correct." Ethan stepped closer to the screen. "What theories?" The scientist swallowed hard before answering. "The plague was never designed to kill civilizations." Her voice trembled. "It was designed to force them to stop abandoning each other." The transmission crackled violently as the elderly scientist leaned closer to her damaged camera feed. Behind her, Ethan could see sparks falling from broken ceiling panels somewhere aboard another containment vessel. "Doctor," he said sharply, "start explaining right now." The woman nodded quickly. "My name is Dr. Celine Vero. I worked on the original VARE research project before Black Site Epsilon lost contact." Her tired eyes shifted briefly toward Lasara, standing beside Ethan. She was never supposed to become patient zero. Lasara looked stunned. "You were part of the first team?" "I was part of the team that tried to stop it." Dr. Vero swallowed hard before continuing. "The pathogen was discovered nearly 40 years ago inside an extinct civilization beyond the Perseus Belt. At first, we believed it was biological warfare." Ethan folded his arms tightly. "And now?" The doctor hesitated. "Now we believe it was a communication system." Silence filled the chamber again. Ethan blinked once. "That does not make any sense." "It does if the species that created it evolved differently than we did," Dr. Vero replied. "The pathogen responds to emotional isolation, social abandonment, prolonged fear responses, and neural distress patterns. It amplifies loneliness until biological systems collapse." Ethan slowly looked toward Lasara. 58 days alone inside this freezing chamber. Every symptom spike after isolation events. Every stabilization reading near direct human contact. Suddenly all of it fit together in the worst possible way. "The plague was feeding on abandonment," he murmured. Dr. Vero nodded sadly. "And Lasara discovered that before anyone else." Lasara stared at the floor beneath her feet, as if old memories had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "The original treatment failed because we kept treating the pathogen like an infection," she whispered. "But it was adapting to emotional conditions instead of physical ones." Ethan looked back toward the scientist. "Then why is human proximity affecting it more than anything else?" For the first time, Dr. Vero almost smiled. "Because humans form unusually strong neurological bonding responses under stress. Your species stabilizes each other instinctively." Ethan gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "So humanity accidentally became medicine." "In simple terms," the doctor replied, "yes." Warning sirens suddenly pulsed louder throughout the station. The AI voice interrupted immediately. "Containment fleet Aurelius preparing sterilization weapons." Ethan moved toward the console. "Doctor, if we transmit the data, they will not listen," she interrupted softly. "Fear has already made the decision for them." Lasara closed, her eyes briefly beside the observation glass. Ethan noticed the black patterns beneath her skin had almost disappeared entirely now. Only faint traces remained near her wrists. "There has to be another option," he said firmly. Dr. Vero hesitated. Then her expression changed. "Concern." "There may be one," she admitted quietly. Ethan stepped closer to the screen. "Tell me." "The pathogen responds strongest during direct neural synchronization." Lasara's eyes widened immediately. "No." Ethan looked between them. "What does that mean?" Dr. Vero spoke carefully now. "If two compatible nervous systems establish sustained emotional synchronization, the pathogen can be forced into dormant cellular stasis." Ethan frowned. "In English?" Lasara answered before the doctor could. "It means the plague can be stabilized permanently if someone links their nervous system to mine." Ethan looked at her. "Okay." "Ethan." Her voice sharpened instantly. "You do not understand." Dr. Vero's face darkened with worry. "The synchronization process transfers emotional and neurological load between both participants. Pain, fear, Memory trauma. If the connection fails, she stopped herself. Ethan already understood enough. It could kill both people involved, he finished quietly. Nobody answered. Outside the observation window, massive warships drifted silently around Black Site Epsilon. Tiny red targeting lights flickered against the station hull. Time until sterilization, 3 hours and 11 minutes. Ethan looked back toward Lysara standing alone beneath the pale chamber lights. She looked terrified now. Not for herself. For him. No, she whispered softly. I will not let you carry this with me. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped closer until only inches separated them. You carried it alone long enough. The synchronization chamber sat beneath Black Site Epsilon like the heart of a dying machine. Frost covered the curved walls. Thin streams of vapor drifted from old coolant vents overhead, while emergency lights pulsed slowly through the darkness in deep red waves. Ethan stood beside the neural interface platform, removing the last pieces of his quarantine gear as the station trembled around them. Somewhere outside, containment ships were positioning for final strike alignment. Sterilization countdown, the AI announced softly. 1 hour, 22 minutes remaining. Lysara stood across from him near the interface cradle, motionless beneath the pale lights. Her silver hair shimmered faintly against the cold steel walls, and for the first time since Ethan arrived, the black plague patterns beneath her skin were almost gone completely. Only thin traces remained near her collarbone like fading scars. You can still leave, she said quietly. Ethan adjusted the neural connector against his wrist and gave a tired smile. You really do say that a lot. Because I know what this will do to you. Her voice trembled slightly now. The synchronization does not only share pain. It shares memory, fear, everything the plague touched inside me. Ethan looked at her steadily across the chamber. Then maybe you should not carry it alone anymore. Silence settled between them. Heavy, warm somehow despite the freezing air. Lysara lowered her eyes for several seconds before finally stepping toward the interface platform. Ethan noticed the fear in her expression had changed. It was no longer fear of him. It was fear of losing him. Dr. Vero's recorded instructions played softly through the chamber speakers as they took their positions opposite each other. Neural synchronization requires emotional stabilization between both participants. Elevated fear responses may destabilize the pathogen during transfer. Ethan glanced toward Lysara. No pressure. To his surprise, she let out a quiet breath of laughter. Small, fragile, real. The interface lights activated beneath their hands as they placed their palms against the silver contact plates. Immediately, Ethan felt warmth spread through his arms like static moving beneath his skin. Then came the memories. Not images at first. Feelings. Crushing loneliness. Endless silence. Fear hidden behind composure for so long it had become part of breathing itself. Ethan saw fragments after that. Empty quarantine corridors. Scientists avoiding eye contact. Doors sealing shut. 58 days staring at stars through frozen glass while believing the entire galaxy wanted you erased. Lysara gasped softly as the synchronization deepened. Ethan felt her grief hit him like ocean pressure. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. The kind that slowly convinced someone they no longer belonged among living people. Tears gathered in Lysara's golden eyes as she looked directly at him through the neural glow between them. Now you see it, she whispered. Ethan swallowed hard against the weight inside his chest. Yeah. The plague reacted instantly. Warning lights flared across the chamber monitors as dark energy surged briefly beneath Lysara's skin before collapsing inward again. Pathogen destabilization detected, the AI announced. Neural synchronization successful. Ethan tightened his grip against the contact plate as another wave passed through both of them. This time he felt something else buried beneath her fear. Hope. Weak. Frightened. But alive. Outside the station, the containment fleet continued preparing weapons. Inside the synchronization chamber, the plague began shutting down cell by cell. The black patterns vanished completely from Lysara's skin. Her breathing steadied. Her heartbeat normalized. Then suddenly the chamber lights stabilized for the first time since Ethan arrived. No flickering. No alarms. Just silence. Warm silence. Ethan slowly opened his eyes fully. Lysara stood inches away from him, now beneath steady white light, looking stunned. Human almost. The AI spoke again, softer this time. Pathogen activity has reached dormant state. Neither of them moved. Neither seemed to know how. Then the station intercom crackled overhead with a final incoming transmission from the containment fleet. Black Site Epsilon. The officer's voice said cautiously. Our scans are no longer detecting plague activity. Ethan looked toward the observation window as the giant warships outside slowly powered down their weapons one by one. Across the chamber, Lasara stared at her own hands like she had forgotten what freedom felt like. Ethan stepped closer carefully. How do you feel? She looked up at him. For the first time since he met her, there was no fear behind her eyes. Only warmth. Only exhaustion. Only relief so deep it almost hurt to witness. Then she reached forward slowly and took his hand without hesitation. Outside, beyond the station glass, the stars reflected gold across her eyes. And for the first time in 212 days, nobody on Black Site Epsilon was alone.